Hi everyone, Card here, and I hope you're all doing okay. In this video I will show you how I made this ruined building for Mordheim, Frostgrave, Warhammer, Dungeons & Dragons and practically any other skirmish wargame. I apologize in advance if you hear any weird background noises. I promise that's the wind, not any lost souls trapped in my crafting supplies. The techniques I used to build this piece are definitely not the most time efficient, but they give a nice result, and overall I think this is one of the most relaxing builds I have worked on yet. It's also very material efficient, as you can cut up even the smallest scraps into bricks. That said, this can take ages to fill a table, so I will be experimenting with other techniques in future videos. Speaking of which, if you have any requests for future builds or how-tos, drop me a comment below or on Facebook. For this build I sliced up a bunch of foam board into 5mm strips. Normally you would want to strip off the paper before you start, but I couldn't do that here, so I also sliced it off at this point. Then I took the strips and used the rules on my cutting mat to cut them into pieces 1 cm long. You can cut 3 or 4 strips at a time this way, just use something to support them as you make the cut. Make lots, you will need a bunch of them, and any leftovers can be used in other projects. Grab your pile of bricks, put them in a can along with some small rocks and give them a good shake. This will soften up the edges of the bricks and make them look a bit more worn. I first saw this on a Blackmagic Craft video, linked in the description. Okay, next up I started gluing some of the pieces 2 by 2. This makes them a lot easier to assemble. Then it's just a case of putting down some baking paper and glue down row after row. The only potentially tricky bit at this stage is the corner I wanted to add in the middle. To build this, I glued a single brick on the outside of the wall, then used that to offset another pair on the inside. You can then build this out as normal. I used a piece from the old Mordheim cardboard terrain, set long broken, to gauge the size, so I could add windows and doors. The next potential problem is the top of the doorway. If you build this up, you will risk having it break on you, as the part directly over the door will be very thin until you're done. Instead, what I did was just build up to the top of the wall on one side, flip it upside down, then build down the other side. You can also make a sub-assembly here if you find it easier. To create the floor, I took a piece of scrap pine, 1 cm thick, and used a knife to slice it into strips, then glue them together. You can also use balsa wood, ice cream sticks, or tongue depressors instead. Before I built up the wall of the upper floor, I left some gaps in the wall where I could plug in the wooden part. The gaps are a bit larger than the pins on the wooden part, so it will still fit once it's painted up. And the rest of the wall was finished up like the ground floor. Once everything was in place, I gave everything a very thin layer of stucco and spread it around with a wet brush to make sure it got more or less everywhere. I also tried to add a little texture with a bit of scouring pad, but this didn't really do anything as the wet stucco just smoothed itself out again. Once the stucco was dry, I could start painting it. I considered going with the moldy stone effect, but in the end I wanted to do some more experiments on this, so I mixed up some Mod Podge and paint, and went all over the walls. The Mod Podge should strengthen the whole piece up, which should make it a bit safer for upcoming stuff. I also added some text to the bottom of the piece. This keeps it off the cutting mat, so it won't stick to it. Once the coating was dry, I slopped on some more stucco and smoothed it with my fingers. The idea was to represent pieces of wall that still had some plaster and paint on them. You can use other stuff instead of stucco. Air drying clay works okay, and my friend Jagelsdorf over at Jagelsdorf Creates uses his own ungodly concoction made of salt and flour. Check out the link in the description. With that dry, I painted over the brown bits with Payne's Grey. I wasn't going for 100% coverage here, but I did want to make sure that any bits I had missed with Mod Podge were coated over. Otherwise the white will stand out like a sore thumb. Then I dabbed the brick surfaces with a piece of kitchen sponge and black and brown paint. Don't go too heavy here, just build up a few layers. Also, don't go light to dark or dark to light, just mix them up. Be careful in areas like the doorway. Until the floor is in place, there is nothing to support it, so it can be a bit fragile. Next, I dry brushed up using mixtures of Payne's Grey and Ivory. This is exactly the same process I used for my tower and the treasure tokens. The plastered bits of the wall were simply given a base coat, dry brush, brown wash, and then some more dry brush. Then I went around the wedges with ivory to represent bits of clean exposed plaster where it had just broken off. I was going for a more vibrant color on the outside to contrast heavily with the brick. Both Mordheim and Frostgrave are set in cities that were thriving before their respective magical apocalypses, so a bit of color might just help suggest that background and help set the mood. I like this kind of thinking in terrain making, so I might do a video about planning this kind of stuff later on. Let me know in the comments if this is something you would find useful. I painted up the wooden parts with my usual cadmium yellow and burnt umber wash recipe, then dry brushed up with grey. With both parts done and painted, I dropped a little PVA glue on the contact points and put the two together. At this point I decided to do a little more weathering and dirtying up, dabbing some brown paint on the lower edge of the ruins with a kitchen sponge, and streaking some very thin black paint under the windows. Fish feature heavily in the Mordheim artwork, so I painted one on the side of the building for the extra WTF factor. And that's one ruin done. Like I said earlier, I will be experimenting with other building techniques as this was kind of slow, but I really do like the result. I'm also quite pleased with the color, as it contrasts nicely with the dark stone of the ruin. It should look great when I have more of these together. And that's it for this video. Let me know if you have any comments, critiques, suggestions, or anything else in the comments below. And if there's anything you would like to see covered in this channel, then do let me know. In the meantime, stay safe and happy crafting!